The report hit my desk at 3 marks past midnight, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. I am Calith Vaughn, senior diplomatic scribe to the eternal throne of the Zelkari Dominion, and in 40 years of service, I have read more intelligence briefs than most officers will see in a lifetime. I have read reports of border wars, assassination plots, fleet movements, and the quiet treacheries that hold empires together. I know what a normal report looks like. I know the rhythm of routine, and the document glowing on my screen that night had none of it. 3 of our patrol cruisers, the Blade of Varan, the Starfire, and the Unbroken Fang, had intercepted a small human cargo vessel near the edge of the Delvan Corridor. This was not unusual. The Delvan Corridor sits at the border of what we consider unclaimed space that humans have settled in recent decades, though we never formally recognized their claim. Our patrols intercepted human ships there regularly. The protocol was simple and had been followed 100 times before. Demand the cargo manifest. Order the crew to submit to boarding. If they resist, disable the ship. If they flee, let them run. Humans were not worth the ammunition. But this time, the cargo ship refused. The patrol commander, a junior captain named Rethan, ordered the standard warning volley. 3 concentrated plasma bursts, enough to strip the shields off a Kreth-heavy cruiser, struck the human vessel directly. The ship did not lose its shields. It did not break apart. It did not even change course. According to Rethan's sensor logs, the plasma bursts hit the hull and simply stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed in the way our shield technology absorbs energy. The energy just ceased to exist on contact. The sensors could not explain it. There was no heat signature, no radiation bloom, no dispersal pattern. The energy was there, and then it was not. I read that line 3 times. Then I read it again. The human ship held position for exactly 4 seconds. Rethan described those 4 seconds as the longest of his career. Then, without any visible engine activation, without any acceleration warning, the ship moved. It went from a dead stop to a velocity that our sensors could not track in under a second. One moment it was there. The next, it was a fading ghost on long-range scanners. And then it was nothing. Gone, as if it had never existed. Rethan filed the report with a note at the bottom that read, "Requesting technical review of sensor equipment. Possible malfunction across all 3 vessels." He did not believe what his own instruments had told him, and I could not blame him. What those instruments described was, by every known law of physics in the galactic record, impossible. I should have taken it to the Emperor immediately. I should have walked into the throne room and placed that report on the arm of his chair and said, "Your Eternity, something has changed." But I did not. I did what scribes do. I filed it. I categorized it. I placed it in the daily intelligence summary, between a trade dispute on the Kreth border and a routine fleet rotation schedule. A footnote among footnotes. The Emperor glanced at it the next morning during his briefing. I watched his 4 golden eyes scan the paragraph I had written, a careful summary of the incident, stripped of alarm, presented as a curiosity. He laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, but with the casual dismissiveness of someone who has ruled 4,000 star systems for longer than most civilizations have existed. "Humans," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous briefing chamber. "Frightened little animals, running from predators." As expected. The War Council members around the table chuckled with him. Admiral Theska, the supreme commander of the Imperial fleet, did not even look up from her tactical reports. The Zelkari Dominion had ruled this galaxy for 11,000 years. We had crushed the Kreth hegemony twice. We had outlasted the Drakh, the oldest silicon-based species in known space. We had built an empire so vast that light itself grew old traveling from one border to the other. The idea that a species like humanity, a species we had classified as a Category 9 minor civilization, barely 60 years into spaceflight, could pose any kind of concern, was not just unlikely, it was laughable. And yet, that night, alone in my quarters, I pulled up the sensor data again. Not the summary I had written, but the raw data itself. The energy readings from the plasma impacts, the velocity calculations from the cargo ship's departure, the complete absence of any recognizable drive signature. I cross-referenced it against every known technology in the Dominion archives. I searched the Kreth databases, The Lyrathi theoretical models, even the ancient Drakh engineering records that dated back 20,000 years. Nothing matched. Not a single entry in the combined knowledge of every advanced civilization in the galaxy could explain what that small, unremarkable human cargo ship had done. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. The room was quiet. The capital city of Veron Prime hummed far below my tower window, a sprawl of light and movement that stretched to the horizon in every direction, the beating heart of the most powerful civilization the galaxy had ever known. I filed the sensor data under a new category I created that night. I labeled it simply, anomalous, human origin, unexplained. It was the first entry. Within 6 rotations, it would not be the last. I should explain what the galaxy looked like in those days, before everything changed, because it is important to understand how certain we were, how absolute our confidence had become, how deeply we believed that the order of things was permanent. The Zelkari Dominion sat at the center of everything. 4,000 star systems, 70,000 warships, a throne that had passed through an unbroken line of rulers for 11 millennia. We were not merely powerful, we were the definition of power. Every other civilization measured itself against us, and every other civilization came up short. Below us sat the Galactic Council of 12, the governing body that we had founded and that we chaired. The Kreth hegemony, with their hive-linked insectoid armies, and their relentless territorial hunger. The Lyrathi Concord, beings of pure luminous energy who perceived dimensions that solid matter species could not even theorize about. The Drake, ancient beyond reckoning, their bodies made of living stone, their memories stretching back to an age when most current species had not yet evolved. And 8 others, each powerful in their own right, each commanding fleets and systems and populations that numbered in the billions. And below all of them, far below, in a classification system that ran from Category 1 down to Category 10, sat humanity, Category 9, one step above uncontacted primitive worlds, a species that had achieved faster than light travel, barely 6 decades ago, that controlled fewer than 40 systems, that had a total population under 20 billion. Their ships were slow, their weapons were crude, their lifespans were shockingly short. 80 years, perhaps 100 with medical intervention. I had colleagues who napped longer than that. The file on humanity in the Dominion archives was thin, unremarkable biology, no natural psionic capability, no exoskeletal armor, no radiation resistance, no hive mind coordination, no ability to perceive higher dimensions. By every metric that mattered, they were ordinary, fragile bipeds on a small rocky world in an unremarkable arm of an average galaxy. The kind of species that the Council noted, catalogued, and forgot. Humanity had requested formal diplomatic recognition from the Council 16 times over 30 years. 16 times, the request had been reviewed, discussed briefly, and denied. Not with malice, not with hostility, but with the casual indifference of powers that simply could not see why it mattered. You do not negotiate with insects. You do not give them a voice. You simply continue as if they are not there. I had drafted 3 of those denial letters myself. They were polite, professional, utterly dismissive, and I had not thought twice about any of them. That was the galaxy I lived in when the patrol cruisers fired on that cargo ship. That was the certainty I carried when I filed the sensor data and went to sleep. The humans were nothing. Everyone knew it. Every record confirmed it. Every analysis supported it. I did not yet understand that the most dangerous species in the universe is not the one with the sharpest claws or the strongest armor. It is the one that everyone underestimates. It is the one that has been told, again and again, that it does not matter, because that is the species with something to prove. And humans, as I would learn, had been proving things in silence for a very long time. In the 6 rotations that followed, I began to notice patterns, not the obvious kind that flash across intelligence screens in red, demanding attention, the subtle kind, the kind that only a scribe notices, because noticing is all we do. It started with the shipping lanes. 3 Zelkari merchant convoys reported sensor anomalies while passing through the sectors adjacent to human-controlled space. Brief gravitational distortions, lasting no more than a few seconds, that appeared on instruments and then vanished before they could be analyzed. The convoy captains attributed them to natural phenomena, dark matter fluctuations, subspace eddies. The usual explanations that spacefaring crews use when something happens that they cannot understand and do not wish to think about. I pulled the records and plotted the anomalies on a star chart. They formed a rough line, curving from the edge of the Delvon corridor through 3 uninhabited systems, and terminating at the border of a region our maps simply labeled as uncharted, human claimed. The line looked, to my eye, like a patrol route. But a patrol route for what? Our long-range sensors showed nothing in those systems. No ships, no stations, no energy signatures of any kind. Just empty space with unexplained gravity. I might have filed this as another curiosity and moved on. But 2 days later, a piece of information reached me that turned curiosity into genuine unease. It came from an unlikely source. The Kreth hegemony had sent a new ambassador to Veron Prime, an insectoid diplomat named Chitarak, who had a reputation for careful silence and a keen mind behind his compound eyes. We met at a diplomatic reception, one of those interminable functions where empires pretend to be friendly while counting each other's weapons. And over a glass of Zelkari ceremonial wine, Chitarak told me something that his government had not yet reported to the council. 12 Kreth scout ships had vanished near the human border. Not 1 or 2, which could be explained by mechanical failure or navigation error, but 12. An entire reconnaissance squadron. They had been conducting a survey of the region, mapping potential expansion routes, when they simply stopped transmitting. No distress signals. No weapons discharge detected. No debris found. 12 ships carrying over 300 crew members had entered human-adjacent space and disappeared as completely as if they had never existed. Chitarak's compound eyes shifted in a pattern I recognized as extreme agitation. "We sent a recovery fleet," he told me, his mandibles clicking softly. 40 warships. They found nothing. Not a fragment of hull, not a whisper of a signal. Just empty space. "My government is concerned, Calith. Quietly, of course. We do not wish to appear weak. But I tell you this because you are a scribe, and scribes understand the value of information that others overlook." I thanked him, and filed the conversation in my private records. That night I did not sleep. I lay in my quarters and stared at the ceiling, and tried to construct a scenario in which 12 military vessels could vanish without a trace near the territory of a Category 9 civilization. And I could not do it. Not with any technology I knew of. Not with anything in the Dominion archives. Not with anything that should exist. The following morning brought the Lyrathi warning. The Lyrathi Concord. Those strange and ancient beings of pure energy who float through the galaxy perceiving things that solid matter species cannot begin to comprehend, had sent a formal advisory to the council. It was couched in their typically cryptic language, a style that the other council members usually dismissed as mystical nonsense. But I read it carefully, and the words settled into my chest like ice. There is something in the dark between the stars that we cannot see. This is unprecedented. The Concord has perceived every object, every energy pattern, every gravitational thread in this galaxy for 9,000 years. We do not fail to see. We see everything. But now there is something that exists, and does not exist simultaneously. It moves. It has mass. It has purpose. And we cannot perceive it. This has not happened before. We advise caution. I read it 3 times. The Lyrathi could perceive dimensions beyond our comprehension. They could sense the gravitational signature of a single ship halfway across the galaxy. They could detect the energy output of a handheld communicator from 1,000 light-years away. And they were telling the council, in their careful, understated way, that something was out there that they could not see. Something that moved. Something with mass. Something with purpose. I tried to bring this to the attention of the War Council. I compiled a report that connected the patrol cruiser incident, the shipping lane anomalies, the Kreth disappearances, and the Lyrathi warning, into a single document. I titled it, Convergent Anomalies, Possible Strategic Concern, and I presented it at the next scheduled briefing. Admiral Theska did not let me finish. She was a brilliant military commander, perhaps the finest the Dominion had produced in 1,000 years. But she suffered from the same blindness that afflicted everyone in that room, the blindness of absolute power. The inability to imagine that something small could become something significant. "You are a scribe, Calith," she said, her tone not unkind but firm. "Not a tactical analyst. Gravitational echoes are well-documented natural phenomena. The Kreth lose ships because the Kreth are careless, and the Lyrathi see riddles everywhere because that is what energy beings do. There is no convergent pattern here. There is a collection of unrelated events that you have arranged to look like a pattern, because arranging things is what you do. Several council members smiled. The Emperor said nothing, but his expression made it clear that he agreed with his admiral. The matter was closed, but I was not finished looking. A scribe learns to be patient. A scribe learns to keep searching when others have stopped. I began pulling communication logs from our listening posts along the human border. What I found, or rather what I did not find, disturbed me more than anything else. For the past 3 years, there had been no human communications on any frequency we monitored. None. No civilian broadcasts, no military chatter, no diplomatic transmissions, no trade negotiations, no navigation beacons. 3 years of absolute silence from a civilization of 20 billion people. That was not normal. Even during wartime, civilizations communicate. Fleets need orders. Merchants need trade routes. Governments need to govern. Complete communication silence across an entire civilization required either total collapse or total discipline. And everything else I was seeing suggested it was not collapse. I checked the human embassy on Gallic Station, the neutral diplomatic hub where most civilizations maintained a permanent presence. The human embassy had been closed for 18 months. The official reason was renovation. But a contact of mine on Gallic told me quietly that the humans had not just closed their embassy, they had removed every piece of equipment, every data terminal, every furnishing, and every molecule of human DNA from the premises. They had cleaned it so thoroughly that it was as if humans had never been there at all. This was not how a civilization undergoing renovation behaved. This was how a civilization that did not want to be monitored behaved. And then came the gravitational anomaly that I could not explain and could not ignore. A deep space research station on the outer fringe of Zelkari territory, Station Velcor 7, detected something moving through an uninhabited system, approximately 40 light-years from the human border. The station's instruments registered a gravitational distortion consistent with an object of enormous mass, something close to the mass of a small moon, moving through space at a velocity that should have been impossible for an object that size. But there was nothing there. No visual signature, no electromagnetic emission, no thermal reading, no subspace wake, no radiation of any kind, just gravity. Pure, unexplained gravity, pulling at the fabric of space-time as it moved through the void. The station commander tracked it for 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, the object, if it was an object, traveled a distance that would have taken a Zelkari warship at maximum velocity, nearly 4 hours to cover. Then it simply stopped registering. The gravitational signature faded and disappeared, and the instruments returned to normal, and there was nothing to prove it had ever been there except the recorded data. The station commander sent the data to Fleet Command. Fleet Command sent it to the War Council. The War Council sent it to me, because no one else wanted to deal with it. I sat in my office and stared at the gravitational readings, and felt something I had rarely felt in my career. I felt afraid. Not the sharp, immediate fear of danger, but the slow, deep fear of realization. The fear that comes when you begin to understand that everything you believed was wrong. Something was out there. Something enormous. Something that could move faster than anything in the galaxy. Something completely invisible to every sensor system ever devised by any civilization in recorded history. And I believed, with a certainty I could not prove, and no one would accept, that it was human. I did not bring this conclusion to the War Council. I knew what would happen. Theska would dismiss me again. The Emperor would lose patience. My access to intelligence reports would be restricted. Instead, I filed the data under my growing anomalous category and waited. The Ascension Summit was approaching. In 3 days, Emperor Zorath Khan would stand before representatives of every major civilization in the galaxy and formally declare the Delvan Corridor to be sovereign Zelkari territory. It was to be the grandest display of Dominion power in a century. 300 warships would hold formation above Viran Prime. 12 delegations would watch and applaud and understand, once again, that the Zelkari were supreme. Invitations had been sent to every council species. Humanity, of course, was not invited. No one even raised the possibility. They were Category 9. They were nothing. The night before the summit, I stood on my balcony and looked up at the stars. The fleet was already assembling, 300 points of light moving into perfect formation above the capital. It was beautiful, in the way that all displays of absolute power are beautiful, overwhelming and cold. For the first time in my life, I looked past the fleet, past the familiar stars, toward the dark space beyond the border. I wondered what was out there. I wondered how long it had been watching us. And I wondered, with a growing dread that I could not name, whether we had made a terrible mistake. Not in our military strategy, not in our diplomatic calculations, but in our most fundamental assumption. The assumption that if something was small, it would always remain small. The assumption that if something was quiet, it had nothing to say. I went to sleep that night, and I dreamed of silence. Not the comfortable silence of peace, but the heavy, pressing silence of something vast and unseen, holding its breath in the dark. The morning of the Ascension Summit, the Obsidian Citadel was alive with a grandeur that I had never seen matched in all my years of service, and I had witnessed ceremonies that would bring lesser beings to their knees. The Citadel itself was a monument to Zelkari supremacy. Carved from the core of a captured asteroid, it hung in low orbit above Veron Prime like a dark jewel, set against the planet's amber clouds. Its outer hull was 20 kilometers across, layered with defensive systems so ancient and so advanced that even our own engineers no longer fully understood how all of them worked. Inside, the throne room stretched nearly a kilometer from end to end, its vaulted ceiling so high that clouds occasionally formed beneath it, drifting between the support columns like tame weather. Floating platforms of polished obsidian ringed the central floor, each one designated for a specific council delegation, each one hovering at a height that corresponded precisely to the assigned rank of the civilization it carried. The Zelkari platform, of course, was the highest, and at its center, elevated above even his own delegation on a throne carved from compressed neutronium, a material so dense that a single cubic centimeter of it weighed more than a mountain, sat Emperor Zorath Khaen the Undying. I stood 3 paces behind his right shoulder, as I always did during formal events. My recording tablet was active, its surface warm against my fingers. My job was to watch, to listen, and to document. I had done it 1,000 times. I expected to do it 1,000 more. Below us, the throne room was filled with over 6,000 attendees. Every council species had sent their most impressive delegation. The Kreth hegemony had brought a full honor guard, 40 of their armored warriors standing in perfect formation on their platform, their chitinous plates gleaming under the Citadel's artificial sunlights. Ambassador Chitarak stood at their front, his compound eyes scanning the room with an alertness that I noticed and others did not. The Larathi delegation was a cluster of luminous forms, beings of pure energy, that shifted between colors as they communicated, their light casting strange moving patterns across the nearby platforms. The elder among them, a being known as the Luminary, burned brighter than the rest, a cold blue-white radiance that was difficult to look at directly. The Drakh had sent a single representative, as was their custom. Their envoy was called Stone of Ages, a silicon-based being that stood nearly 4 meters tall and moved with the deliberate patience of a creature that had personally witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. The Drakh did not rush. They did not need to. They had been old when the Zelkari were still learning to build fires. 8 other delegations filled the remaining platforms. Diplomats, military attachés, nobles, scholars, advisors. The combined political and military power in that room could have leveled a solar system. And above all of it, visible through the Citadel's transparent dome, the Imperial fleet held formation. 300 warships, the most powerful vessels in the Zelkari arsenal, arranged in concentric rings above Veron Prime. Their hulls caught the light of the planet's sun and threw it back in flashes of silver and gold. It was a display designed to remind every being in attendance of a simple fact. The Zelkari dominion was unchallengeable. It had always been so. It would always be so. Emperor Zorath Khan rose from his throne. The chamber fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every perceiving organ in the room turned toward him. He was tall, even by Zelkari standards, nearly 3 meters, with 4 golden eyes that seemed to burn with their own internal light. His ceremonial armor was made from the same neutronium as his throne, polished to a mirror finish, that reflected the entire room in miniature across his chest. He raised one hand, and his voice filled the chamber, amplified by systems embedded in the walls so that every being heard him as if he stood directly before them. For 11,000 years, the Zelkari Dominion has been the guardian of order in this galaxy. We have kept the peace. We have arbitrated disputes. We have held the line against chaos. Today, we exercise our right and our responsibility to extend that protection to a new region. The Delvan Corridor, unclaimed and undefended, falls under our sovereignty from this moment forward, now and for all ages. He paused. The expected applause began, a carefully orchestrated sound that rippled through the delegations with practiced precision. The Kreth clattered their mandibles. The Lirathi brightened momentarily. Even the Drakh representatives shifted, which was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation from a being made of living stone. And then the censors screamed. I will never forget that sound. In 40 years of service, I had heard every alarm the Citadel was capable of producing. Proximity alerts, shield warnings, atmospheric breach klaxons. I knew them all, but the sound that erupted from the Citadel's sensor systems at that moment was none of those. It was something I had never heard, a rapid, discordant tone that rose and fell in a pattern that seemed almost confused. Later, I learned that the technical classification for that alarm was unidentified sensor conflict. The system had detected something that it could not categorize. It did not know if what it was seeing was a threat, a malfunction, or something outside its entire frame of reference, so it did the only thing it could do. It screamed. Every display in the throne room activated simultaneously. The decorative projections that had been showing the Zelkari imperial crest and ceremonial imagery vanished, replaced by a real-time feed from the external sensor arrays. The view showed the space directly above Varian Prime, where the 300-ship Imperial fleet held its perfect formation. And there, in the exact center of that formation, something was appearing. It did not arrive. It did not jump in from faster-than-light travel. It did not emerge from a portal or a fold in space. It became visible, slowly, deliberately, as if it had been there all along, and was simply choosing, at this precise moment, to let us see it. The first thing I noticed was the shimmer, a distortion in the star field, like heat rising from sun-baked stone, bending the light from the stars behind it into curves that should not have existed. Then the edges appeared, hard lines where the shimmer became solid, angles that resolved into surfaces, surfaces that resolved into a hull. A ship, a human ship. But it was not like any human ship I had ever seen in our records. The vessels we had catalogued were small, clumsy things with visible engine housings and crude sensor arrays, the kind of ships that a young civilization builds when it is still learning the basics of interstellar engineering. This was something else entirely. It was enormous. The Imperial fleet's flagship, the Sovereign Will, was the largest warship in our arsenal, 3 kilometers from bow to stern, a vessel that had never met its equal. The human ship that materialized in the center of our fleet was more than 5 times that length. It hung in space like a dark monument, its angular hull covered in geometric patterns that seemed to drink in every photon of light that touched them. No engine glow, no running lights, no visible weapons ports, no external features of any kind that I could identify, just mass, silent, impossible, overwhelming mass. The throne room had gone quiet, not the polite silence that precedes applause, but a different kind entirely. The airless, frozen silence of 6,000 sentient beings realizing at the same moment that something fundamental about their understanding of the galaxy had just broken. Emperor Zorath Khan was standing at his throne, one hand still raised from his interrupted speech. I watched his 4 golden eyes move across the display, tracking the data that was streaming alongside the visual feed. The ship's dimensions, its mass readings, the sensor confusion as every instrument in the fleet tried to analyze it and failed. The data was impossible. The ship was not merely large. It was radiating a passive scan, a broad-spectrum sensor sweep that was reading every ship in the Imperial fleet simultaneously. Not probing aggressively, just reading. Calmly, efficiently, and with a thoroughness that our own technology could not match. Shield frequencies, weapons loadouts, crew counts, reactor outputs, Power distribution networks. Every secret that a warship keeps hidden in its systems was being read like an open book. And we could do nothing in return. Our sensors could see the ship now, could register its size and mass and position, but they could not penetrate its hull. Every scan returned blank. No internal readings, no crew count, no weapons assessment, no power signature. The most advanced sensor technology in the galaxy, the product of 11,000 years of Zelkari engineering, looked at that ship and saw a wall. Admiral Theska was on her feet, on the military platform below the Emperor's throne. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. Raise shields, all ships. Target that vessel. The orders went out. Across the fleet, 300 warships activated their combat systems. Shield generators hummed to full power. Weapons arrays swiveled toward the dark shape that sat motionless among them. Targeting systems attempted to establish firing solutions. They could not lock on. The human ship's hull was doing something to the targeting sensors, something that the fleet's fire control officers had never encountered. They could see it with visual confirmation. It was right there, filling their viewports. But the automated targeting systems, the systems that guided plasma bursts and kinetic rounds and everything in between, could not acquire it. The ship existed, visually, physically, gravitationally, but it was invisible to every weapon system in the fleet. In the throne room, I watched the Kreth ambassador collapse backward into his delegation. Chitarak's armored legs buckled beneath him, and his mandibles began clicking in a rapid pattern that I recognized from Kreth behavioral studies as a fear response. A deep, involuntary fear response that Kreth displayed only when they believed they were about to die. Around him, the Kreth honor guard broke formation, their discipline shattering as the primal terror of their hive instincts overwhelmed their training. The Lyrathi delegation dimmed, all of them, simultaneously, their luminous forms flickering and fading until they were barely visible. I had never seen a Lyrathi dim before. I did not know they could. Later, I learned that it was their equivalent of going pale with shock, an involuntary response triggered by the sudden perception of something that should not exist. The luminary, the eldest among them, was the last to dim. Its blue-white radiance stuttered, and then dropped to a faint glow, and in that fading light, I thought I saw something I had never seen in a Lyrathi before. Recognition, as if it had been right about its warning, and wished it had been wrong. Stone of Ages, the Drakh representative, did not move. The Drakh rarely did. But the ancient being's crystalline eyes, usually opaque and unreadable, had developed a faint internal luminescence. Among the Drakh I had read, this indicated profound interest, or profound concern. Their language did not distinguish between the two. On the other platforms, chaos was spreading. Diplomats were shouting into communicators. Military attaches were demanding information from their ships in orbit. Several smaller delegations had abandoned their platforms entirely, their members clustering near the exits, looking for escape routes from a room that suddenly felt like a cage. And through it all, the Emperor stood motionless. I was close enough to see his face, close enough to see the muscles of his jaw tighten beneath his ceremonial armor, close enough to see the almost imperceptible tremor in the hand that was still raised from his interrupted speech. Emperor Zorath Khan the Undying, ruler of the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy, was staring at a ship that should not exist, sitting in the middle of a fleet that could not touch it. And for the first time in my memory, I saw uncertainty in his golden eyes. Theska's voice came again, harder now, edged with something that I had never heard from her before. Not quite fear, not yet, but the precursor to it. Targeting systems are non-responsive. All frequencies are being jammed. The ship is not hostile, but it is not responding to hails. I have no tactical options. The room absorbed that statement. The Supreme Commander of the largest fleet in the galaxy had just said, in front of representatives of every major civilization, that she had no options. 300 warships, the combined firepower to crack a planet's crust, and she could do nothing. Then the transmission came. It was audio only. No visual feed. No data stream. Just a voice, calm and unhurried, and perfectly clear, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, filling the throne room's speakers as if the person speaking were standing in the center of the chamber. The voice spoke in High Zelkari, not the trade pigeon that most aliens used when dealing with us, not the simplified diplomatic register. High Zelkari, the formal court language of the emperor himself, spoken with a fluency and precision that would have impressed a native scholar. Every inflection correct, every tonal register perfect. A human voice speaking our most sacred language as if it had been born to it. Emperor Zorath Khan, the Delvan corridor is not yours to claim. Humanity requests a seat at this summit. We will wait. Then silence. The transmission ended. The ship did nothing. It hung motionless in the center of the fleet, patient and dark and impossibly large, and it waited. I looked at the Emperor. He looked at Admiral Theska. Theska looked at her tactical display, at the 300 warships holding position around a target they could not engage, at the sensor readings that made no sense, at the impossible mathematics of a ship that should not be there. "My Emperor," she said, and then she paused. And in that pause, I heard the sound of an era ending. "I have no recommendation." The throne room remained silent, not because no one had anything to say, but because no one knew what to say. The galaxy, in that moment, had rearranged itself around a single dark shape in the sky, and every being in that room could feel it. The old order, the order that had held for 11,000 years, the order that we had believed was permanent, was cracking. And through the cracks, something new was emerging. Something patient, something silent, something that had been there, in the dark, watching and waiting and building, for longer than any of us had realized. Something human. In the hours that followed, while the Emperor deliberated behind sealed doors and the fleet held its useless formation around a ship it could not threaten, I did what I have always done. I searched for answers. The Citadel's archives are the most comprehensive repository of knowledge in the galaxy. Every intelligence report, every scientific study, every diplomatic communication, every piece of data that the Dominion has gathered over 11,000 years is stored in crystalline matrices beneath the throne room floor. I had access to nearly all of it, a privilege of my position that most people envied and few understood. Access to information is not power. Understanding what the information means is power. And that night, as I dove deeper into the archives than I ever had before, I began to understand things that I wished I could forget. I started with humanity's official file. It was exactly as I remembered. Thin, dismissive, and condescending. Category 9 Minor Civilization. First contact 63 years ago. Homeworld designated Sol 3, a small rocky planet orbiting a yellow main sequence star in the outer arm of the galaxy. Population approximately 19 billion at last survey. Technological level assessed as primitive by galactic standards. Military capability rated as negligible. Diplomatic status denied. But now I was not reading for confirmation. I was reading for what we had missed. I pulled every interaction report between Zelkari officials and human representatives over the past 30 years. There were hundreds of them. Most brief, most dismissive. Trade requests denied. Territorial claims ignored. Diplomatic petitions rejected. And in every single interaction, the same note appeared in the human response column. A simple, polite acknowledgement of the denial, followed by a statement that humanity remained committed to peaceful dialogue. No threats, no anger, no demands. Just a quiet repetition of the same message. We are here. We wish to talk. We will try again. I counted the requests. 16 formal petitions for council recognition. 23 requests for trade agreements. 11 proposals for joint scientific research. 7 appeals regarding Zelkari patrol ships entering what humans considered their sovereign space. Every single one denied. And after each denial, the same patient, measured response. Reading them in sequence, one after another, I felt something shift in my understanding. I had always read those responses as weakness, passive acceptance, the meek compliance of a species that knew its place. But now, sitting in the archive chamber, while a ship the size of a small continent hung silently above the planet, I reread them and saw something different. I saw patience, deliberate, strategic, terrifying patience. The patience of a species that had decided, at some point, that words were not enough. That had decided to stop talking and start building. And that had waited, quietly, for the right moment to show the galaxy what it had built. The next thing I searched for was the communication blackout. 3 years of silence from human space. I pulled our signals intelligence reports from that period, and found exactly what I expected. Nothing. Our listening posts had recorded not a single transmission from human territory in 37 months. No civilian broadcasts, no military communications, no navigation signals. An entire civilization had gone dark. But buried in the signal's intelligence archives, I found something that the original analysts had overlooked. During the first month of the blackout, just before human communications ceased entirely, there had been a single burst transmission on a frequency that our equipment could barely detect. It lasted less than 2 seconds. The content was encrypted in a method that our cryptographers could not crack, but the transmission's origin point was logged, and when I plotted it on a star chart, I felt ice settle into the base of my spine. It had come from empty space, not a star system, not a station, not a planet, a point in the void between systems where there was nothing. No astronomical object, no known structure, just darkness. Unless something was there that we could not see. I turned to the scientific archives next, searching for anything related to the technology that the ship above us was demonstrating. Cloaking technology. Full-spectrum invisibility. I knew the history. Every major civilization in the galaxy had attempted to develop cloaking at some point. The Zelkari had spent 2,000 years on it, before abandoning the research. The Kreth had tried for 500. Even the Drakh, with their 20,000-year memory, had pursued it for 10 millennia before their greatest engineers declared it physically impossible. The problem was fundamental. To make something truly invisible, you had to hide it from every type of detection simultaneously. Light, heat, radiation, gravity, subspace resonance, quantum fluctuation. Defeating one or two was achievable. Defeating all of them at once required bending the fabric of space-time around the cloaked object, creating a bubble of distorted reality that let everything, light, gravity, energy, pass around it as if it were not there. The energy required to maintain such a bubble around anything larger than a molecule was calculated to be greater than the total output of a medium-sized star. It was not merely difficult, it was, by every model we had, impossible. And yet the ship above Veron Prime existed. It had been invisible to every sensor in the galaxy, until it chose not to be. It was not just invisible to light, it was invisible to gravity, to subspace detection, to quantum scanning, to the Lyrathi's energy perception, to everything. It was, for all practical purposes, a hole in reality that moved. The humans had done what every civilization in the galaxy said could not be done, and they had done it in 60 years. I sat with that realization for a long time, alone in the archive chamber, surrounded by the crystalline matrices that contained 11,000 years of accumulated knowledge. All of that knowledge, all of those centuries of research and discovery and engineering, and a species that had been traveling between stars for barely 6 decades had surpassed all of it. Not incrementally, not by a small margin. They had leapt so far ahead that our best scientists could not even theorize about how they had done it. Then I found the spectral analysis. While the ship's interior was invisible to our sensors, its hull was not, now that it had decloaked. Our fleet's instruments had been scanning it continuously since it appeared, and the spectral data on the hull material was available in the tactical database. I pulled it up and immediately called a materials science colleague, a researcher named Darveen who owed me several favors. Darveen analyzed the data for less than 10 minutes before calling me back. His voice was shaking. The hull material was unlike anything in any known periodic table. It appeared to be constructed at the atomic level, each individual atom placed with a precision that our manufacturing technology could not approach, not assembled molecule by molecule, which was the current frontier of Zelkari materials science. Atom by atom, each one positioned deliberately in a lattice structure that Darveen said would take him years just to model theoretically. He estimated that the manufacturing capability required to produce such a material was at least 500 years beyond the most advanced technology in the galaxy. 500 years. A Category 9 civilization, 60 years into spaceflight, was operating with technology that the galaxy's greatest powers would not achieve for 5 centuries. My last search was the one that tied everything together. I was looking for context, not technology, not military intelligence, but understanding. Why had humans done this? How had they done this? A species with no psionic ability, no hive mind coordination, no millennia of accumulated knowledge, no natural advantages of any kind, had somehow outpaced every civilization in the galaxy. What was different about them? I found my answer in a forgotten corner of the academic archives. A research paper, published 40 years ago by a Zelkari xenologist named Dr. Valith. Her thesis had been rejected by every academic institution on Veron Prime. Her colleagues had called it alarmist, unsupported, and borderline ridiculous. She had been stripped of her research funding and quietly pushed out of the scientific establishment. Her paper had been read by fewer than 30 people before being buried in the archives. I was perhaps the 31st. Dr. Valith had studied human cognition and compared it to every other spacefaring species in the galaxy. Her finding was simple and, in retrospect, devastating. Every advanced civilization had evolved with a specific cognitive advantage. The Kreth had hive-linked parallel processing, allowing millions of minds to work on a single problem simultaneously. The Lyrathi perceived additional spatial dimensions, giving them an intuitive understanding of physics that solid matter species could never match. The Drakh had institutional memory spanning 20,000 years, a continuous chain of knowledge never lost, never forgotten. Every species had its edge, its one great strength. Humans had none of these things. Their brains were generalist organs, good at many things but exceptional at nothing measurable. They could not process information in parallel like the Kreth. They could not perceive higher dimensions like the Lyrathi. They could not remember with the perfect fidelity of the Drakh. By every cognitive metric, they were average. But Dr. Valith had identified something that the metrics did not capture. Humans were adaptive in a way that no other species could match. When faced with a problem they could not solve, they did not accept failure. They changed their approach. They combined disciplines. They made intuitive leaps that defied formal logic. They failed repeatedly and treated each failure as information rather than defeat. And most crucially, they were driven by something that Dr. Valith struggled to translate into Zelkari, a concept that humans called spite. Not anger, not revenge, something colder and more enduring. The absolute refusal to accept a verdict imposed by others. The deep, burning determination to prove wrong anyone who said they could not. We had told them they were nothing. We had told them they did not matter. We had ignored them, dismissed them, and denied them a voice, 16 times over 30 years. And instead of accepting it, they had gone quiet, and in the silence, they had built something that could make the galaxy listen. I closed the archive terminal and sat in the dark for a long time. The citadel hummed around me. Somewhere above, a ship that should not exist waited with a patience that I now understood was not passivity but discipline. Somewhere in the sealed council chambers, the Emperor was trying to decide what to do about a problem that he had created by refusing to acknowledge that it was there. And I understood, at last, what we were dealing with. Not an enemy, not a threat. A species that had been given every reason to come with weapons drawn, and had instead come with a single ship and a single sentence. A request, not a demand. A chair, not a conquest. That, more than the technology, more than the cloaking, more than the impossible hull material, was what frightened me. The weapons I could understand, the restraint I could not. The Emperor summoned me at dawn. I found him alone in his private chamber, a small room by Citadel standards, barely 30 meters across, with a single viewport that looked out over Veron Prime. The planet's amber clouds swirled below, lit by the first rays of the sun, and above them, visible even in the brightening sky, the dark outline of the human ship remained. It had not moved. It had not transmitted. It had simply waited through the long night, as promised. Zorath Khan was standing at the viewport, still wearing his ceremonial armor, though it was clear he had not slept. His 4 golden eyes were focused on the dark shape above, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. You read the reports that others discard, Kalith. You see the patterns that others dismiss. Tell me what we are facing. I had prepared for this question. I had been preparing for it all night. But standing before the Emperor, speaking the words aloud, made them heavier than they had been in my mind. A species that was told it was nothing, your eternity. 16 times, they asked for a voice, and 16 times, we refused them. They did not argue. They did not threaten. They simply stopped asking and started building. Everything we have seen, the cloaking technology, the impossible speed, the hull material, the communication blackout. It all leads to the same conclusion. They spent the last 3 years, at minimum, preparing for this moment. Not a moment of war, a moment of demonstration. The Emperor did not turn from the viewport. You believe they could destroy us. I believe that if they wanted to destroy us, they would have arrived differently. That ship appeared in the center of our fleet, read every vessel's systems in seconds, and made itself immune to our weapons. And then it asked for a conversation. That is not how a species begins a war. That is how a species proves it does not need one. The Emperor was quiet for a long time. Outside, the Imperial fleet still held formation. 300 warships surrounding a single vessel they could not challenge. The most powerful military force in the galaxy, reduced to an honor guard for a species they had classified as insignificant. The Kreth are demanding to withdraw their delegation, the Emperor said finally. The Drakh envoy has requested a private audience. The Lyrathi are communicating with their homeworld in patterns my advisors cannot decipher. Half the council delegations are threatening to leave if we do not resolve this situation. Theska tells me she still cannot establish a weapons lock. My intelligence chief tells me he has no information on human military capabilities beyond what that ship has already shown us. And you, my scribe, are telling me that we created this problem by ignoring it. Yes, Your Eternity. He turned from the viewport and looked at me directly, and in his golden eyes, I saw something I had never expected to see in an emperor. Not fear, not anger, but the raw, uncomfortable weight of a being confronting the consequences of choices made over decades. Choices that had seemed insignificant at the time. Denying a minor species a hearing, ignoring a petition from a civilization too small to matter. Small choices, made casually, by beings who believed they were too powerful for small choices to have consequences. Convene the council, he said. Full session, all delegations. And the humans, Your Eternity? He paused at the door, then slowly, he nodded. Open a channel to their ship. Tell them that humanity is invited to address the council. The council session convened within the hour. The throne room was the same one where the Ascension Summit had been so spectacularly interrupted, but it felt different now. The floating platforms still held their delegations. The vaulted ceiling still soared above. The Citadel's systems still hummed with ancient power. But the energy in the room had changed. The confidence was gone. In its place was a tension so thick that I could feel it pressing against my skin like atmospheric weight. The Emperor took his throne, but did not sit elevated above the chamber, as he had during the summit. Instead, he lowered his platform to the same level as the council delegations. It was a small gesture, but every being in the room understood it. The Emperor was not presiding over this session. He was participating in it. That alone was unprecedented. The message had been sent to the human ship. The response had been immediate. A shuttle was on its way. The shuttle landed in the Citadel's main docking bay, and I was there to witness it. It was small, no larger than a standard Zelkari transport, with a smooth, featureless hull, made of the same light-absorbing material as the warship above. No weapons, no shields, no escort. It settled onto the landing platform with barely a sound, and sat there for a moment, quiet and still. Then the hatch opened, and a single human stepped out. I had studied images of humans in the archives, but I had never seen one in person. She was smaller than I expected, barely 1.75 meters, which put her well below the chest height of most Zelkari, and made her look almost childlike beside the Kreth honor guard that still lined the corridors. Her hair was gray, cut short, and her face was lined with the marks of age that humans accumulate in their brief lives. She wore a dark uniform, simple and unadorned. No medals, no rank insignia, no weapons, no jewelry, nothing that indicated status or power of any kind. She looked, to be frank, like someone's grandmother. She walked through the corridors of the Obsidian Citadel, past towering Zelkari guards in full combat armor, past Kreth warriors who could have torn her apart with a casual swipe of their armored limbs, past Drakh sentinels who weighed more than her entire shuttle, and she walked as if she were strolling through a garden. Her pace was unhurried. Her expression was calm. Her eyes moved across the Citadel's architecture with what appeared to be genuine appreciation, the way a tourist might admire a cathedral. I fell into step beside her as protocol required, and I offered the standard greeting in Galactic Common, She turned to me and smiled, a human expression that I knew intellectually indicated friendliness, but that I found unsettling in its openness, and she responded in flawless High Zelkari. "Thank you, Scribe Caliph. The citadel is beautiful. I have read about it for many years. I am glad to finally see it." She knew my name. She knew my rank. She spoke my emperor's court language better than some Zelkari nobles I had met, and she had just casually mentioned that she had been reading about our most secure military installation for years. I filed all of this and said nothing. Her name was Eleanor Voss. She introduced herself simply, without title or rank, as she stepped onto the central floor of the throne room. She did not bow. She did not kneel. She did not perform any of the ritual gestures of submission that every other non-Zelkari species performed when addressing the council. She stood in the center of the chamber, a small, gray-haired woman in a plain, dark uniform, surrounded by 6,000 representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. And she looked up at Emperor Zoreth Khan on his throne and spoke as if they were equals. "Emperor Zoreth Khan, members of the Galactic Council, thank you for this invitation. I will be direct, because I believe that you deserve directness, and because you have waited long enough for answers." The chamber was silent. Every being listened. 30 years ago, humanity reached out to this council. We requested recognition. We requested dialogue. We requested the same basic courtesy that every civilization in this chamber was extended when it first joined the galactic community. We asked 16 times. 16 times we were denied. We were told that we were too small, too young, too insignificant. We were classified as Category 9, a designation that, in your own administrative language, means not worth the effort of acknowledgement. She paused. Not for effect, I thought, but to let the words settle. She was not performing. She was reporting. We did not argue with that classification. We did not send warships to your borders. We did not threaten or posture or make demands. We simply accepted that words alone would not be enough to earn your attention, and we began to consider what would. Eleanor Voss turned slowly, addressing the entire room, her voice carrying clearly to every platform. 3 years ago, we went silent. I know your intelligence services noticed. I know your analysts debated what it meant. Some of you concluded we had collapsed. Some of you did not care enough to form a conclusion at all. The truth is simpler. We went quiet because we were building, and we did not want to be interrupted. She looked up at the viewport, where the dark outline of the human ship was visible against the stars. The vessel above your planet is the silent testimony. It is the first ship of its class. I will not tell you how many more exist. I will not tell you where they are. I will not tell you what weapons they carry, or what other capabilities they possess. These are not threats. They are simply facts that you have not yet earned the right to know. The Kreth ambassador, Chitarak, rose on his platform. His mandibles were clicking rapidly. You presume to lecture this council? You appear uninvited with a single ship and make demands? The hegemony does not respond to intimidation. Eleanor Voss looked at him. She did not raise her voice. She did not change her expression. She simply looked at him with those strange, flat human eyes and said, "Ambassador Chitarak, we know about your 12 missing scout ships. Their crews are alive. They have been our guests for the past 8 months, treated with courtesy and respect. We will return them to you, all 314 of them, as a gesture of good faith. They are unharmed. They have been well fed. Several of them have expressed interest in human cooking, which I understand is unusual for the Kreth." Chitarak sat down. He did not say another word for the remainder of the session. I watched his compound eyes go still, the rapid clicking of his mandibles reduced to silence, and I understood that in that moment, the Kreth hegemony, the second most powerful military force in the galaxy, had just been told, politely and with a reference to cooking, that humanity had captured an entire squadron of their warships without firing a shot, and without the hegemony even knowing how. The luminary, the elder Leyrathi, brightened on its platform. Its voice, when it spoke, was a harmonic resonance that translated into words through the chamber's systems. "We perceived your warning. 3 years ago, when your transmissions ceased, we sensed a change in the fabric of space near your territory. Something new. Something we could not identify. We chose not to investigate. Perhaps that was wisdom. Perhaps it was cowardice. Tell us, human, what do you want? Eleanor Voss nodded toward the Lirathi, a gesture of respect. What we have always wanted. A seat at this table. The same voice that every civilization in this chamber possesses. Nothing more. And if this council refuses? Stone of Ages, the Drakic representative, spoke for the first time. Its voice was the sound of tectonic plates shifting, deep and slow and impossibly old. Then we will leave, Eleanor Voss said, and we will continue to exist in the spaces you cannot see. And every ship that passes through the dark between your stars will wonder if it is alone, not because we wish to frighten you, but because that is the reality you will have chosen. We would prefer a different reality, one where we can sit in this room and talk as equals about the future of a galaxy that belongs to all of us. The chamber processed this. I could see the calculations happening in real time across every delegation platform. The military implications, the political ramifications, the sheer scale of what was being offered and what was being implied. The Lirathi Concord moved first. The luminary brightened to its full radiance, a blue-white blaze that cast sharp shadows across the chamber, and spoke with a certainty that I had rarely heard from a species that usually dealt in ambiguity. The Concord supports humanity's inclusion in this council. They have demonstrated capability. They have demonstrated restraint. In our experience, it is the combination of the two that defines a civilization worthy of partnership. The Drak representative was next. Stone of Ages did not move, but its crystalline eyes flickered with that inner light. Interesting, it said. And then, after a pause that seemed to last in geological age, the Drak do not oppose. One by one, the other delegations spoke. Some voiced support, some abstained, none opposed. The momentum was clear. Humanity had not just appeared in the sky, it had reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy in a single morning, not through force, but through the careful, deliberate demonstration that force was available and had been deliberately withheld. Every eye turned to the Emperor. Zorath Khan sat on his throne, his 4 golden eyes fixed on Eleanor Voss. I stood behind him, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. He was calculating. Not military outcomes, not political strategies, but something deeper. The kind of calculation that an emperor makes when he realizes that the galaxy he rules is not the galaxy he thought it was. He could refuse. He still had 300 warships and the most powerful military in the galaxy. He could order the fleet to attack, knowing that it might fail, knowing that it probably would fail, but preserving the Dominion's pride. He could call humanity's bluff, if it was a bluff, and gamble everything on the chance that one ship, however advanced, could not withstand the full fury of the Imperial fleet. Or he could do what Eleanor Voss had done when humanity was denied 16 times. He could adapt. The silence stretched. I counted my own heartbeats. 5, 10, 20. Then Emperor Zorath Khan the Undying, ruler of 4,000 star systems, lord of the Obsidian Citadel, chair of the Galactic Council for 11,000 years, looked at the small gray-haired woman standing on the floor of his throne room, and spoke 4 words. "Bring a chair, now." The command echoed through the chamber. An attendant, moving with the shocked haste of someone who has just witnessed history pivot on a phrase, brought a seat. It was a simple chair, hastily retrieved from an anteroom, made of polished Zelkari wood, unadorned and ordinary. It was placed among the council platforms at the same level as the other delegations. Eleanor Voss looked at the chair. Then she looked at the Emperor. And for the first time since she had entered the chamber, something changed in her expression. The diplomatic calm softened. The careful composure gave way, just for a moment, to something raw and real. She blinked, and I realized with a start that there was moisture in her eyes. Tears, I recalled from my studies of human biology, an involuntary response to strong emotion. She sat down, and the Galactic Council of 12 became the Galactic Council of 13. I recorded every word. I have recorded 10,000 council sessions in my career. I have documented wars and treaties, coronations and abdications, the rise of empires and the fall of civilizations. And I can tell you, with the certainty of a scribe who has spent his entire life in the service of history, that no session I have ever recorded will be remembered the way this one will. The galaxy did not change that day because of a weapon. It did not change because of technology, though the technology was beyond anything we had imagined. It did not change because of threats or ultimatums or displays of destructive power. It changed because a species that had every reason to arrive in fury arrived instead in patience. They could have decloaked their ship with weapons armed and shields raised. They could have destroyed the fleet, cracked the citadel, and burned Varan Prime to glass. Everything I had learned about their capabilities suggested they had the power to do exactly that, and they knew that we knew it. But they did not come for conquest. They came for a chair. A simple chair, an ordinary seat at an ordinary table. The kind of thing that should have been offered freely 30 years ago when they first asked. The kind of thing that costs nothing to give and everything to withhold. I think about that often. In the days and weeks and months that have followed, as the galaxy has slowly, painfully adjusted to the new reality of a species that can move unseen through the dark between stars, I return to that moment again and again. The moment when the most dangerous civilization in the galaxy sat down in a wooden chair and chose to talk. That is what frightens me most about humans. Not the silent testimony hanging in orbit, not the unknown number of sister ships hiding in the void, not the technology that is 5 centuries beyond our own, not even the knowledge that they captured an entire Kreth squadron without firing a single shot. What frightens me is the restraint. I have studied every species in the known galaxy. I have cataloged their histories, their wars, their conquests, their failures. And in all of those records, across all of those civilizations, I have never found a single example of a species that built the power to dominate the galaxy and then walked into a room full of its rivals and asked, politely, for permission to sit down. Every other species, including my own, would have used that power. We would have arrived with weapons hot and demanded submission. It is what the strong do to the weak. It is what we did to every civilization that challenged us for 11,000 years. Strength was the right to rule, and rule was the exercise of strength. Humans do not think this way, and that, I have come to believe, is why they are more dangerous than anything the galaxy has ever encountered. Not because of what they can destroy, but because of what they choose not to. Eleanor Voss remained on Varan Prime for 6 days after the council session. During that time, she met with every delegation individually. She was polite, professional, and utterly forthcoming about humanity's desire for peaceful integration into galactic affairs. She answered questions about human culture, human governance, human art, and human history with a warmth and openness that disarmed even the most suspicious diplomats. She did not answer questions about the silent testimony. She did not discuss human military capabilities beyond what had already been demonstrated. When asked how many cloaked ships humanity possessed, she smiled and said, "Enough." When asked where they were deployed, she said, "Where they need to be." When asked what other technologies humanity had developed during its 3 years of silence, she said, "We look forward to sharing them with our new partners, in time." On the 6th day, she returned to her shuttle. Before she boarded, she turned to me. I had been assigned as her diplomatic escort, and over 6 days, we had spoken often. She was curious about everything. About Zelkari history, about the Citadel's architecture, about my work as a scribe. And she listened, truly listened, in a way that I found both disarming and unsettling. "Calith," she said, standing at the shuttle hatch. "You were the only one who noticed, were you not? The sensor data, the missing ships, the gravitational anomalies. You were the only one who put it together." I said nothing. I did not know how she knew this. She smiled. "We noticed you too. Your queries in the archives did not go unobserved. We have been watching this world for longer than your emperor would be comfortable knowing, and we saw a scribe who looked at the evidence and drew the right conclusion, even when everyone around him refused to listen." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you will write the history," she said. "And when you do, I want you to remember one thing. We did not build the silent testimony because we wanted to frighten the galaxy. We built it because we had no other choice. When no one will listen to your words, you must find another way to speak. We chose to speak softly. We just made sure we had something very, very large to carry while we did it." She stepped into the shuttle, and the hatch closed, and the small vessel rose through the Citadel's docking bay and returned to the dark ship above. An hour later, The silent testimony reactivated its cloak. One moment it was there, a vast shadow against the stars. The next, it was gone. Not departed. Just invisible. Still there, perhaps. Or perhaps already light years away. There was no way to know. And that, I believe, was the point. I returned to my quarters that evening and began writing. Not a report, not an intelligence brief, not a diplomatic summary. A record. A true account of everything that had happened, from the first anomalous sensor reading to the chair in the throne room. I wrote because that is what scribes do. We preserve the moments that matter, so that those who come after us can understand what changed, and why, and what it means. The galaxy has a 13th seat at the council table now. A wooden chair, still unadorned, placed among the platforms of civilizations that have existed for millennia. It is the simplest object in the most powerful room in the galaxy, and it has become the most significant. Because it represents something that the galaxy had never seen before. A species that earned its place not through conquest, not through domination, not through the ruthless application of superior force, but through the simple, stubborn, impossibly human act of refusing to be ignored. They built their answer in the dark. They carried it across the void. And when they finally spoke, they said the same thing they had been saying for 30 years. We are here, we wish to talk. The only difference was that this time, the galaxy listened. And I, Calith Vone, senior diplomatic scribe to the eternal throne of the Zelkari Dominion, sat at my desk and recorded it all. Every word, every silence, every shift in the balance of power that followed from a single ship appearing where no ship should have been. I have spent my entire life in service to an empire that believed it was eternal. I know now that nothing is eternal. Not empires, not certainties, not the assumptions we build our civilizations upon. The only thing that endures is the willingness to change. The humans taught us that. The hard way. And I suspect they are not finished teaching us yet.